James Mitchell gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Rain hammered against the windshield of his Lexus with such violence it felt personal, as if the sky itself had chosen him for punishment. The wipers fought a losing battle against the water, and the road ahead dissolved into a gray blur that merged with his own tears. Yes, tears. At 52 years old, James Mitchell was crying while driving alone on a deserted highway. Crying after the board meeting where he'd closed another multi-million-dollar deal that left him feeling hollow inside. Crying on his way back to the sprawling house where nobody waited for him. Crying over the life he'd built brick by brick, success after success, victory after victory, a life that felt like a sandcastle about to be swept away by the tide. "What's it all for?" he whispered to the emptiness, his voice lost in the deafening roar of the storm. "What's the point of having everything when you have no one?" The rain intensified. Lightning split the sky like luminous scars, and thunder exploded so close it made the car shudder. James eased off the gas, his vision too blurred to maintain the 70 miles per hour he'd been driving. That's when he saw them, or rather, almost didn't see them. Two silhouettes beneath a massive oak tree on the roadside, completely drenched by rain that tore through the branches like bullets of water. James drove past. "Not my problem," he thought, accelerating again. "Probably homeless people or travelers. Someone will help them. I need to get home, take a hot shower, pour myself some scotch and do what? Sit alone in his 6,000 square foot living room, stare at the ceiling while silence devoured him alive. His mother's face flashed through his mind. Margaret Mitchell, the woman who'd raised him with such devotion, who'd died 3 years ago without him getting to say goodbye. James had been on a business trip to Chicago when he got the call. By the time he reached the hospital, she was gone. Her last words had been to the nurse, "Tell my son I always loved him, always." But James never found out if there was something more she'd wanted to say. Something trapped in her throat, unspoken, unconfessed. The guilt hit him like a punch to the gut. He slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet pavement, spun completely around, and came to a stop on the shoulder with the engine rumbling like a wounded animal. James sat frozen, breathing heavily, his hands shaking on the wheel. "Damn it," he whispered. "Damn it, damn it, damn it." He threw the car in reverse. He drove back down the highway, eyes searching for the silhouettes under the tree. And when he finally found them and stopped the car, turning on his high beams toward them, what he saw made his heart squeeze in a way he hadn't felt in years. They were elderly, an elderly couple who could have been 70, 80 years old, maybe older. It was hard to tell with the rain washing over their wrinkled faces, with soaked clothes clinging to fragile bodies that visibly trembled even from a distance. But what truly shocked James, what made his stomach turn and his throat close up, was the complete scene. Next to them on the ground, which was turning to mud, sat an old leather suitcase. The kind people used decades ago when traveling was a rare and special event. It was open, completely open, like a gaping mouth swallowing rain. And inside, James killed the engine and stepped out of the car without even grabbing an umbrella. The rain hit him like icy whips, soaking his $3,000 suit in seconds. He didn't feel it. His eyes were fixed on the suitcase. Stacks of money, dozens of them. $100 bills, 50s, organized in perfect piles that were now being destroyed by the rain. Water ran through the suitcase like a small river, carrying away pieces of paper, dissolving ink, transforming a fortune into wet garbage. And among the stacks of money there were photographs. Old photographs, the kind that yellow with time, with white borders and faded colors. The rain attacked them mercilessly, making the ink run, erasing faces and memories. But the couple did nothing. Absolutely nothing. They simply embraced under the tree, the man wrapping the woman with arms that looked like dry branches, she resting her head on his shoulder with an expression James couldn't decipher. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was something worse. It was acceptance. As if they decided it was no longer worth fighting. "Hey!" James shouted, running toward them, his Italian leather shoes sinking into the mud. "Hey! Are you two okay? What are you doing out here?" The couple slowly lifted their heads, as if waking from a nightmare. The woman had sunken eyes, exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying invisible weight for too long. The man looked at James with an expression that mixed surprise and something that seemed like shame. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. "Don't worry about us. Continue on your way." James stopped a few feet from them, incredulous. "How can I not worry? You're soaked. And that suitcase, that money is being destroyed." He quickly crouched down and began picking up the wet bills, trying to save them. His hands trembled as he gathered note after note, watching decades of savings transform into worthless paper. "How many years did you save this? Why aren't you protecting it?" "Leave it," the man said, his voice hoarse and broken. "That money isn't ours." James froze, a soaked bill dripping between his fingers. "What do you mean it's not yours? It's in your suitcase." "It was," the woman corrected, and there was such deep pain in her voice that James felt a chill run down his spine. "It was ours, but it never should have been." James looked between them and the suitcase, confused and frustrated. "Look, I don't know what your story is, but you're going to die of hypothermia if you stay here. Come with me. I'll take you somewhere dry, warm, and—" "We don't want charity," the man interrupted, but without aggression, just exhaustion. "We don't deserve it." "Everyone deserves not to freeze to death in the rain," James shot back, his patience wearing thin. He grabbed more stacks of money, and then his hands touched something different. Photographic paper. Wet, slippery, almost destroyed. He picked up a photograph carefully, like holding an injured bird. It was a child, a little boy, maybe 2 years old, with dark curls and big eyes that seemed to stare at the camera with innocent curiosity. He sat in the lap of a young woman. The woman was holding the child as if he were the most precious thing in the world. James looked at the elderly woman under the tree, looked back at the photograph. It couldn't be, but it was. He saw the same eyes, older, sunken by decades of suffering, but the same shape, the same tilt. "Who is this child?" James asked, his voice coming out strange. The woman began to cry, not dramatic sobs, but silent tears that mixed with the rain. "Our son, our baby." James picked up another photograph. The same child, now in the lap of the young man, and when he looked at the elderly man under the tree, he saw the same nose, the same face shape, just carved by years of pain. His heart began to beat faster. He grabbed another photograph, and another, and one more. All showed the same child at different moments. A birthday with a homemade cake, an afternoon at the park, sleeping in a makeshift crib. And then James picked up a different photograph. In this one, the child wore a small blue onesie. A onesie that James was absolutely certain he'd seen before. Not in a photograph, not in an album. Stored in a box at the back of his mother's closet. Margaret had kept that onesie her entire life. "It's what you were wearing the day you came to us," she used to say with that mysterious smile. "I wanted to keep it as a memory." James always found it strange that she didn't have photos of him wearing that onesie. "We didn't have time to take pictures," was the evasive answer. "You grew so fast." James's hands began to tremble violently. He looked at the photograph, looked at the couple, looked back at the photograph. The child had a small birthmark on his neck, a crescent-shaped mark. James automatically brought his hand to his own neck, where the same mark had always been. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." But his hands wouldn't stop picking up photographs, and in each one he saw details he recognized. The same ear shape, the same crooked smile, the same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every day. Who are you?" James shouted, now standing, the photographs falling from his trembling hands. "Who the hell are you?" The couple slowly stood, leaning on each other. The woman looked at James with an expression that was half hope, half terror. "My name is Eleanor," she said, her voice breaking. "And this is Henry. And you are—" She couldn't finish. She just extended a trembling hand, gently touching James's face, her fingers tracing his jawline as if memorizing every line. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "The same eyes. I knew. I always knew that if I saw you again, I'd recognize those eyes." James pulled back as if burned. "You're crazy. You're seeing things. That child isn't me." "Yes, it is," Henry said, and there was absolute certainty in his voice. "You're our Jamie, our baby who was taken from us when you were 2 years old." James's world began to spin. "My parents abandoned me," he said, but his own voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "When I was 2 years old, they abandoned me because they didn't want me, because I was a burden, because—" "Lie!" Eleanor practically screamed, falling to her knees in the mud. "Lie! We never abandoned you. Never! We loved you more than our own lives." "Then why?" James shouted back, feeling something breaking inside him. "Why did you give me to another family? Why did you disappear?" "Because we were starving," Henry said, and there was such raw pain in his words that James felt it like a cut. "Because we had nothing. Because you had pneumonia, and we didn't have money for a doctor. Because a wealthy family offered to adopt you and promised you'd have everything you needed." Eleanor grabbed the soaked suitcase with desperate hands. "They gave us this money, $200,000, a fortune. They said it was for us to start over. But the condition," she choked on a sob, "the condition was that we'd never look for you again. That we'd forget you existed." James looked at the money destroyed by the rain. "And you accepted." "We accepted the money because we were desperate," Henry said. "But we never touched a single penny, not a single note. For 43 years, we carried this money like an open wound." "Why?" James whispered. Eleanor lifted her eyes to him, and James saw an ocean of suffering in them. "Because every time we looked at that money, we saw the price we paid for you. It was the money of our shame, of our sin. We promised each other that when we found you, we'd return every cent to that family." "And the photographs?" James asked, looking at the destroyed images scattered in the mud. "We managed to take some photos before we took you to them," Eleanor explained. "They were all we had of you. I carried them with me everywhere I went my entire life. I looked at them every night before sleeping, imagining how you'd be." Henry picked up one of the photographs from the mud with reverence. "We spent every penny we could save after that trying to find you. We hired detectives, paid for information, followed false leads across the country. It took 43 years, but we finally discovered where you were." "Then why are you here?" James gestured to the deserted road. "Why under a tree in the storm?" "Because when we arrived in your city this morning," Eleanor said, "we first went to the house of the family that adopted you. We wanted to return the money before looking for you. We wanted to come clean into your life. And," James could barely breathe, "the man who opened the door recognized us," Henry said bitterly. "Robert Mitchell. He looked at us like we were ghosts. Said you never knew the truth, that you believed we'd abandoned you, that if we told you the truth now, it would destroy your life." Eleanor gripped James's arm with surprising strength. "He offered us more money, 100,000 more if we'd leave and never come back. Said you were happy, successful, that you didn't need poor parents like us ruining your reputation." "And you accepted?" James felt bile rising in his throat. "We refused," Henry said with dignity. "We said we just wanted 5 minutes to see our son from afar, just to see that you were well. But he threatened us, said he'd call the police, that he'd accuse us of extortion. So we came here," Eleanor continued, looking at the empty road. "We decided we'd wait, that if we crossed paths with you by chance, it would be destiny. And if we didn't," she looked at the open suitcase, "we'd let the rain carry away both the money and these photographs. We'd let everything go." James fell to his knees in the mud beside them, the rain washing his tears as fast as they fell. He grabbed the destroyed photographs with trembling hands, seeing his own childhood face staring back at him through the water and time. 43 years. 43 years living with hatred in his heart for people who never abandoned him. 43 years believing a lie that shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of loneliness. "You," he began, but his voice failed. He tried again. "You really are." He couldn't say it. Couldn't speak the words that would make all of this real, that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Eleanor touched his face again, and this time James didn't pull away. "Yes, my son," she whispered. "Yes, we're your parents, and we never stopped loving you, not for a single day in 43 years. And there, under a tree in a violent storm, with a suitcase of money being destroyed by rain and photographs of a lost life scattered in the mud, James Mitchell completely fell apart, because the life he knew had just been revealed as a lie, and the truth he'd just discovered was infinitely more devastating than any fiction. James couldn't stop shaking as he drove back toward the city. Eleanor and Henry sat in the back seat, wrapped in emergency blankets he'd kept in the trunk, still soaked, still trembling. The suitcase with the destroyed money and photographs sat on the floor between their feet, dripping water onto the leather mat. Nobody spoke. The silence inside the car was so heavy it suffocated. James glanced at the rearview mirror occasionally, seeing the two elderly people huddled together, and each time he looked, he felt his chest tighten more. My parents. My real parents. He couldn't process it, couldn't fit this information into the life he knew. It was like someone had taken an already assembled puzzle and thrown all the pieces into the air. James? Eleanor's voice came softly from the back seat. Are you all right, son? Son. The word hurt in a way that was both good and bad at the same time. I don't know, he answered, honest. I don't know what I am. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the garage of his mansion. An absurdly large house for one person. 5 empty bedrooms, 3 bathrooms nobody used, a kitchen where he never cooked. Good Lord, Henry whispered as they entered. This is your home? James looked around as if seeing the place for the first time. Yes. Too big, isn't it? Big and empty, Eleanor observed, and there was no judgment in her voice, only sadness. He led them to the nearest guest room. I'll get dry clothes. There's a bathroom right there, hot water, clean towels. Take a shower, warm up. I'll make tea. In the kitchen while the kettle heated, James leaned against the marble counter and covered his face with his hands. The memory came without warning, sharp as broken glass. He'd been 17 when he overheard the conversation that changed everything. It was late at night. He'd come downstairs to get water and heard his parents' voices coming from the study. The door was slightly open and he stopped in the hallway, not wanting to eavesdrop but unable to move. We need to tell him, Robert. It was his mother's voice, Margaret, tense in a way James had never heard. He's already asking about baby photos. It's not fair to keep lying. Lying, his father responded, irritated. We saved that boy. Gave him a life those people never could have given him. James felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. Those people? But we promised, Margaret insisted. Promised they could watch him grow up, that we'd stay in touch. And we vanished, changed cities, cut all ties. Because it was best for him. Robert slammed his hand on the desk. You think it would have been good for the boy to keep seeing his birth parents? Get confused about who his real family is? We did the right thing, Margaret. Birth parents. The words echoed in James's head like gunshots. But what if he finds out someday? Margaret asked, her voice breaking. What if he hates us for lying? He'll never find out. Those two have no way to find us. And even if they do, who's going to believe them? 2 poor folks against us? James backed away from the door, stumbling. He climbed the stairs without making a sound, entered his bedroom, locked the door, and collapsed on the floor. Adopted. He was adopted. And his parents, the parents he loved, that he trusted, had lied to him his entire life. The kettle's whistle yanked James from the memory. He prepared tea with shaking hands, spilling hot water on the counter. When he returned to the living room with the tray, Eleanor and Henry had already showered. They wore the clothes he'd set out, one of his sweatshirts on her, which hung enormous, and pajama pants on him. They looked even more fragile in those oversized clothes, but they were clean, dry, alive. Thank you, Eleanor said, taking the cup with trembling hands. It's been so long since I've had a hot shower like that. James sat in the armchair facing the couch where they were. Where were you living? Henry and Eleanor exchanged glances. He was the one who answered. On the streets, son. For about 6 months now. On the streets. James felt his stomach turn. Why? What happened? We had a little rented room, Eleanor explained. Nothing fancy, but it was our corner. But when we found out where you lived, we spent the last money we had to get here. Took buses, hitchhiked, came any way we could. And when we arrived, I already told you, Henry completed. The man who raised you sent us away, and we had nowhere to go. James closed his eyes. Why didn't you come straight to me? Why go to his house first? Because we needed to return that money, Eleanor said, and there was urgency in her voice. Do you understand, son? We carried that guilt for over 40 years. We couldn't come to you with that weight on our conscience. But the money's destroyed, James pointed out. The rain ruined everything, and maybe that's better. Henry said with a tired sigh. Maybe it was meant to be washed away, purified. I don't know. James looked at them both, old, exhausted, with an entire lifetime of suffering stamped on their faces, and he felt something breaking inside him. Tell me, he asked, his voice hoarse. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Eleanor took a breath. Her hands shook around the teacup. We were so poor, James. So terribly poor. We lived in a wooden shack with leaks and rats. There were nights we went to bed hungry to save the little we had for you. You were so small, she remembered, smiling through tears. So beautiful, with those curls and those bright little eyes. We loved you so much it hurt. But then you got sick, Henry continued. Pneumonia, and we didn't have money for a doctor. You coughing with fever, getting weaker every day. We were losing you, Eleanor sobbed. We watched our baby dying in front of us and couldn't do anything. James wiped his own tears. And then the Mitchell family appeared. They appeared, Henry confirmed. Robert and Margaret. They'd heard about us through a social worker. Came to the shack, saw the situation. Offered to adopt you. At first we refused, Eleanor said quickly. Said no, that we'd find a way, that we wouldn't give up our son. But you were getting worse. The fever wouldn't break. And they said they had money for private doctors, medicine, everything. They said you'd have a good life, Henry continued. Education, food, a decent home. And they promised we could watch you grow up. That we could visit. You believed them? We were naive, Henry admitted. Desperate and naive. We signed the papers, accepted the money, and handed you over. Eleanor covered her face. The worst day of my life. When I took you from my lap and placed you in her arms, you cried, reached your little arms out to me, called Mama. And she couldn't continue, just cried. They promised they'd call, Henry said. That they'd send photos. That we could see you at least once a month. But they never called. They moved cities. Disappeared. We tried to find you. Eleanor wiped her face. Spent years trying. But they had money. Influence. We had nothing. Nobody would help us. The authorities laughed in our faces. James stood, walked to the window, looked out at the night, processing. All these years, he said without turning around, I thought you'd abandoned me, that I wasn't good enough, that you didn't love me. No. Eleanor stood too, went to him. We love you. Always loved you. I built my entire life on top of that pain, James continued, his voice shaking. Got rich to prove I had value, that I deserved to be loved, that you'd been wrong to leave me. He turned to her. But you never left me. Never. And the ones who lied, he choked, were the people I called Mom and Dad. Henry approached too. They loved you in their own way, son. Doesn't justify the lie, but it doesn't justify anything, James exploded. They stole you from me, stole me from you. I could have grown up knowing I had two parents looking for me, who loved me from afar. But instead, he collapsed. Simply collapsed there in the middle of the living room, falling to his knees, sobbing like he hadn't done since childhood. Eleanor and Henry surrounded him, embraced him, and the three stayed there, a tangle of pain and love and lost years, crying together for the first time in over 40 years. I'm so sorry, James cried. So sorry for believing, for hating you. You didn't know. Eleanor stroked his hair like she did when he was 2. It wasn't your fault, but I lost so much time. We have now, Henry said. We found each other. That's what matters. James pulled back a bit, looking at them both. Old, exhausted, marked by life. But here, present, real. You're going to stay here, he said, determined. In this house, with me. It's not a request. It's a son wanting to take care of his parents, Eleanor completed, smiling. Yes, James agreed, feeling something healing inside him. That's exactly what it is. But there was still one thing to do. One conversation that needed to happen. With Robert. The man who'd raised him with love but built that love on a devastating lie. 3 days passed. 3 days of adjusting to a new reality. 3 days of Eleanor teaching James how to really cook. Not fancy internet recipes, but real food. Properly seasoned beans, fluffy rice, steak with onions. A man needs to know how to take care of himself, she'd say, swatting him with the wooden spoon when he burned something. 3 days of Henry fixing things around the house that had been broken for months. A dripping faucet, a sticking garage door. Manual work is therapy, he'd explain. Clears your head. And James, who'd always paid someone to do these things, discovered there was satisfaction in working with his own hands, in learning from the father he never had. But on the 4th morning, James woke up knowing what he had to do. He found Eleanor in the garden, already up with the sunrise, her hands in the soil of a neglected flower bed. "I need to talk to him," James said quietly. Eleanor looked up, dirt smudging her cheek. She didn't ask who. She already knew. "Do you want us to come with you?" "No." James knelt beside her. "I need to do this alone." She cupped his face with her soil-stained hands. "Whatever happens, we're here. We'll always be here now." 2 hours later, James stood in front of the colonial mansion where he'd grown up. The house still had that imposing look, impeccable gardens, pristine facade, that air of success that impressed everyone. But now, looking through the eyes of a man who knew the truth, he could only see a beautiful prison, a golden cage built on lies. His hand shook as he rang the doorbell. Martha, the housekeeper, opened the door and her eyes widened. "Mr. James, what a surprise. Mr. Robert wasn't expecting—" "I know, Martha." He walked in without waiting for an invitation. "Where is he?" "In the study, but—" James was already climbing the stairs. He knew every step of this house, every hallway, every door. He'd been happy here, or thought he had been. He stopped in front of the study door, breathed, hesitated for a second, his hand trembling on the doorknob. "He raised you," a voice whispered inside him. "Gave you everything. Loved you. But he lied," another voice answered. "Stole you from those who loved you first." He opened the door. Robert Mitchell sat behind the mahogany desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing papers. He looked up when the door opened, and the smile that started to form died when he saw the expression on James's face. "What happened?" he asked, slowly removing his glasses. James closed the door behind him. "I found them." Robert's face went white. "Who?" "Don't pretend." James's voice came out cold. "You know exactly who." Robert stood, his hands bracing on the desk. He swallowed hard. "James, let me explain." "Explain?" James took a step forward. "Explain how you stole me from my parents. How you lied to me for almost 30 years. How you made me believe I'd been abandoned when you're the one who cut all contact. I did what was best for you." Robert raised his voice, but there was nervousness there, fear. "Best for me or best for you?" James felt the anger rising. "You wanted a son and didn't care who you'd destroy in the process." "I gave you everything." Robert walked around the desk, gesturing. "Education at the best schools, travel opportunities. Look at what you became. Doesn't that count?" "It counts." James stopped a few feet from him. "It counts that you can buy a lot with money. Accept the truth." Robert looked away, ran his hand through his graying hair. "They told you their version. Their version is the truth. You promised they could watch me grow up, promised to stay in touch, and you vanished. Because it would have been confusing for you," Robert defended himself. "A child can't have 2 sets of parents. Would have left you divided, lost." "So you decided for me." James felt his chest burning. "Decided it was better for me to grow up hating people who never hurt me. Decided to lie when I asked you at 17. Robert fell silent, looked down. "Look at me," James demanded. He looked, and James saw guilt there, saw remorse, but he also saw stubborn pride from someone who didn't want to admit their mistake. "I love you, James." Robert's voice trembled. "From the day you arrived in this house, I loved you as a son. Margaret loved you. We gave you the best we had. Real love doesn't start with a lie." "We were afraid," Robert exploded. "Afraid of losing you. Margaret couldn't have children, you know that. When the chance to adopt you appeared, it was like a miracle. We weren't going to risk sharing you with anyone else. They're my birth parents, they weren't anyone else." Robert stepped back as if he'd been slapped. "After everything we did for you, you still choose them?" "It's not about choosing," James shouted, and the pain in his voice echoed through the study. "It's about you stealing my chance to know my own story, to know where I came from. You made me believe I was discarded trash when I was actually a loved son who had to be given up out of desperation. They sold you for money. They accepted money to save my life. I was dying of pneumonia, And you know what they did with that money? James felt hot tears streaming. They kept it for 43 years, every cent, because they felt it was blood money, because they wanted to return it when they found me. Robert shook his head. That doesn't change the fact that we raised you, that we gave you a good life built on a lie. James wiped his face. You know what's worse? It's not you adopting me. It's you making me believe nobody else wanted me, that I wasn't worthy of love, that I'd been abandoned. I spent my entire life trying to prove my worth because I thought I'd been discarded. I just wanted to protect you. Protect me from what? From love? From truth? James laughed bitterly. You protected your own fear of not being enough. The silence that followed was heavy. Robert returned to his chair, sinking into it like a defeated man. He removed his glasses and covered his face. Margaret knew, he said quietly. In her last months, she wanted to tell you the truth. Said you deserved to know before it was too late. James felt his heart race. And you didn't let her. I said it would destroy everything, that you'd hate us, that it would ruin our family. Robert looked up, his eyes red. She died carrying that secret, and I think that's what killed her. Not the disease, the guilt. The words hit James like punches. His mother, the woman who'd rocked him when he had nightmares, who'd bandaged his scraped knees, who'd taught him to tie his shoes, had died carrying that weight. I could have forgiven her, James whispered. If she'd told me, I would have been angry, but I would have forgiven her. I didn't let her. The fault is mine. Robert lowered his head. I was so afraid of losing you that I ended up losing you anyway. James looked at the man before him, the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd attended every school meeting, who'd applauded at his graduation, who'd loved him, yes, but who'd built that love on rotten foundations. I don't know if I can forgive you, he admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know if I ever can. Robert nodded, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. I understand. I understand. But I'm going to try. James took a deep breath. Because Margaret would have wanted that. Because despite everything, you raised me, gave me good things along with the lies. And because holding on to hatred will only destroy me more. They're here? Robert asked. Henry and Eleanor. They're at my house. Robert stood slowly. Can I speak with them? James hesitated. Why? To apologize. For what I did. For what I took from them. Robert wiped his face. I know it won't change anything, but I need to say it. 20 minutes later, the four of them sat in James's living room. Eleanor and Henry together on the couch, tense as cornered animals. Robert in an armchair, his hands shaking in his lap. James standing near the window, watching. The silence was suffocating. Robert cleared his throat twice before words came out. I don't know where to start. Start by asking forgiveness, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Robert looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in decades, he saw not the poor people he'd dismissed, but the parents who'd surrendered their son out of desperate love. I'm sorry. The word came out small, but sincere. I'm sorry for lying, for promising you'd watch James grow up and then disappearing, for painting you as villains when you were just scared parents trying to save your son. Eleanor bit her lip. Henry squeezed her hand. I was so afraid, Robert continued, afraid that if you stayed in his life, he'd realize you loved him more than we did, that he'd want to go back to you, and I couldn't bear that. We would never have taken him from you, Henry spoke. We just wanted to know he was all right, to watch from a distance, to know we'd made the right choice. I know that now. Robert lowered his head. But back then I only thought about myself, about what I wanted, about my fear of losing. And we lost 43 years, Eleanor said, tears finally falling. 43 years without watching our son grow, without knowing if he was happy, if he was sad, if he was alive. I'm so sorry, Robert cried openly now. I'm so sorry. I stole that from you, and nothing I do will give it back. The silence filled the room again. James watched the three of them, feeling like his entire life was being rewritten before his eyes. I can't forgive you yet, Eleanor said finally. It's too fresh. It hurts too much. But, she looked at James, our son seems to have become a good man, so you must have done something right. Robert released a trembling sigh. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but Thank you. Henry cleared his throat. The money you gave us. We brought it back. It was in a suitcase, but the rain destroyed everything. Keep what's left, Robert said quickly. Or better, let me replace it. It's the least I can do. We don't want your money, Henry refused with dignity. We never wanted it. But you need somewhere to live, too. They're living with me, James interrupted. Everyone looked at him. In my house. There's plenty of room. And his voice failed. I want to make up for lost time. Eleanor stood, went to him. She held his face with her calloused hands. My son. My boy. James embraced her, then Henry, who'd also stood. The three stayed there, intertwined, crying for the lost time, but also for the chance to start over. Robert watched from a distance, and for the first time in decades, he did the right thing. He let them have that moment without interfering. The following weeks brought strange adjustments. Eleanor didn't know how to use the modern washing machine and spent 20 minutes staring at the buttons until James taught her. She laughed at herself, saying in her day everything was done in a washtub, by hand. Henry got lost 3 times inside the house trying to find the bathroom. It's too big, son, he complained. People don't need this much space. But gradually, they found their place. Eleanor started caring for plants James had always let die. Within a week, the garden that had been just weeds had flowers blooming. Plants need conversation, she'd say, watering the pots. They need to feel someone cares. Henry fixed the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for months. Then he repaired the garage door that stuck. Craftsmanship doesn't forget, he murmured, satisfied with the work. And James watched everything, discovering pieces of them in each gesture. One night, he came home late from a meeting and found them both in the living room, watching television. But they weren't just watching. Eleanor was knitting something, her fingers moving automatically while her eyes followed the show. Henry mended an old shirt with infinite patience. You don't need to fix old clothes, James said, setting down his briefcase. I can buy new ones. This shirt's still good, Henry replied without looking up. Would be wasteful to throw it away. James sat on the couch, observing. Were you always like this? Fixing everything? Making everything last? Eleanor smiled sadly. When you have nothing, you learn to care for the little you have, like it's treasure. But now you have. James gestured to the house. You have all this. You don't need to. Oh, son. Eleanor set down her knitting. We won't change who we are just because we're in a different place. We were poor our whole lives. That stays in your soul. Henry agreed. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being poor teaches value. Teaches that what matters isn't what you have, but what you do with what you have. James fell quiet, processing. His whole life he'd chased having more, buying more, accumulating more, as if quantity would fill the void. But these two elderly people who had almost nothing seemed more complete than he'd ever been. Another week passed. James came home early from the office and found Eleanor in the kitchen, crying softly while stirring a pot on the stove. Mom, the word came out before he thought. What's wrong? She quickly wiped her face. Nothing, son. Just old lady foolishness. Tell me. He approached, leaning on the counter beside her. Eleanor turned off the heat, stood staring at the pot. I was making sweet corn pudding, the kind you loved when you were little. And I remembered. Her voice broke. I remembered I never made it for you again after they took you. 43 years without making the food my son loved. James felt a knot in his throat. I don't even remember liking corn pudding. You loved it. Eleanor smiled through tears. You'd ask for it every day. You'd make such a mess eating, get all sticky, and I'd complain, but I adored cleaning you up afterward. I adored every second with you. She turned to him, holding his face. You know what hurts most? It's not the time we lost. It's knowing you grew up without having anyone make corn pudding for you. Without having anyone let you make a mess. Without having us. But you're here now. Now you're already a grown man. Already raised. We missed everything. The first day of school. The first tooth that fell out. The first girlfriend. Graduation. Eleanor cried openly now. We missed watching you grow, James. And nothing in the world gives that back. James hugged her. And they both stood there in the kitchen, embracing, crying for what could have been but never was. Some days later, it was Henry who seemed different, too quiet, staring at nothing. James found him in the garden, sitting on a bench, his hands trembling in his lap. Dad? He sat beside him. Everything okay? Henry took a while to answer. I was thinking about all the times I imagined this moment. Finding you. Talking to you. But in my head, you were still that little boy. That baby I gave away. He looked at James. And now you're a man. A successful, intelligent, strong man. And I wasn't part of any of it. Didn't teach you to be a man. Didn't give advice. Wasn't there when you needed me. That wasn't your fault. I know. But it hurts just the same. Henry wiped his eyes. It hurts knowing another man watched you take your first steps. That another man taught you to shave. That another man hugged you when you cried. But you never gave up looking for me. No, never. Henry squeezed his hand. But looking isn't the same as being present. And I'll die knowing I lost the chance to be a father day by day. I only managed to be a father in my heart. James felt the weight of those words. You can be now. You can be from here forward. From here forward we're old, son. We have a few years at most. We can't recover 43. Then we make each day count for 10, for 100. Henry smiled, sad but hopeful. You're a good man, son. Despite everything, you became a good man. The weeks kept passing. Eleanor taught James to cook. Not fancy internet recipes, but real food. Properly seasoned beans, fluffy rice, steak with onions. A man needs to know how to take care of himself, she'd say, swatting him with the wooden spoon when he burned something. Henry took him to fix things around the house. Taught him to change a valve, repair a switch, paint a wall. Manual work is therapy, he'd explain. Clears your head. And James, who'd always paid someone to do these things, discovered there was satisfaction in working with his own hands, in learning from the father he never had. One night, the three were having dinner, something James never did before. Always ate something quick in front of the computer. When Eleanor asked about his work. It's a lot, he began. Meetings, contracts, decisions. I move millions every day. And does that make you happy? She asked, direct. James stopped, his fork in the air. Nobody had ever asked that question. I don't know. I never thought about it. Then it's time to think, Henry said. Because money doesn't hug you when you cry. Success doesn't keep you company when you're alone. But I'm not alone anymore. James looked between them. Now I have you. You have us, Eleanor agreed. But what about when we're not here anymore? The idea made James's stomach turn. Don't say that. We're old, son. We have to say it. Henry was gentle but firm. When we're gone, what will you have? This huge house? Money in the bank? Or will you have built something worthwhile? Relationships, purpose, peace. James lowered his eyes. I don't know how to do that. Learn, Eleanor said simply. You still have time. You have the rest of your life ahead. We didn't have that luck. We lost 43 years. But you don't need to lose any more. More weeks passed. James started coming home earlier from work. Delegated more. Said no to meetings he didn't need to attend. And he began having dinner with them every day. Sitting in the living room to talk. Learning their stories. Eleanor told about her childhood in the countryside, on a farm, with 8 siblings. Henry talked about working since age 7, taking any job that appeared. And James listened, really listened. He discovered his birth mother had a sharp sense of humor, that she made dry jokes that took a few seconds to understand, and then made you laugh out loud. He discovered his birth father knew how to fix anything, that he had magic hands that transformed trash into treasure. He discovered they loved each other deeply, tested by time and suffering, but never broken. And he discovered they'd loved him from the first second, that every choice they made was from love, that giving him up was the hardest thing they'd ever done, but they'd do it again if it meant saving him. One night, James woke to a sound coming from the hallway. He got up and found Eleanor standing at his bedroom door, just watching. Mom, everything all right? She jumped, embarrassed. I'm sorry, son. I wake up sometimes and need to see if you're here, if you're real, if I'm not dreaming. James felt his heart squeeze. I'm here. I'm real. I know. She smiled. But sometimes I still can't believe it. 43 years praying, hoping, and now you're here, sleeping in the next room, alive, healthy, with us. She wiped a tear. It's too much miracle for an old lady's head to process. James went to her, hugged her. I'm still processing too, but we have time now. We have all the time in the world. No, son. Eleanor hugged him back. We don't. Old people like us. We don't know how much time is left. That's why I don't want to waste a second. I want to keep each moment, each conversation, each hug. So when it's time to go, I go complete. Knowing that, at least in the end, I got to be a real mother. And James understood. Understood that time was the most precious gift. That there was no second act, no replay. That each moment with them was unique and irreplaceable. And that he'd wasted too many years chasing things that didn't matter. But now he knew. He knew what really mattered. James was in an important meeting when his phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again, and again. On the third ring, his business partner glanced at him with irritation. You going to answer that thing? It was Henry, and his voice was shaking in a way that made James's stomach drop. Son, you need to come home. Now. What happened? It's your mother. She collapsed in the kitchen. The ambulance is already on its way, but James didn't hear the rest. He was already running. The hospital had that smell he hated. Disinfectant mixed with fear. He found Henry in the hallway, sitting on a hard plastic chair, his head in his hands. Dad? James knelt in front of him. How is she? Henry lifted his face. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 hours. The doctors are examining her. They said it could be her heart. She has high blood pressure. Never treated it properly because she never had money for doctors. Guilt hit James like a punch. Why didn't she tell me? I could have taken her to the best cardiologist in the city. She didn't want to be a burden. Henry wiped his eyes. Said she was already too much of a weight living in your house, eating your food. Didn't want to be a burden with sickness too. She's not a burden. James felt his voice breaking. She's my mother. A young doctor came out of the room, removing his gloves. Family of Mrs. Eleanor? They both jumped up. She's stable for now, the doctor explained. It was a cardiac arrhythmia. We got it under control, but she'll need continuous medication and monitoring. Untreated hypertension for so long caused damage. Will she be okay? James asked, desperate. The doctor hesitated. That brief pause said more than words. Look, I'll be frank. She's advanced in age, her heart is compromised. With proper care, she could live for years, but she could also have another episode tomorrow, next week. There are no guarantees. The words fell like stones. Can I see her? Yes, but only one at a time, and not for long. She needs rest. James looked at Henry. You go first. I know you're desperate. Henry squeezed his shoulder. Thank you, son. While Henry was inside, James sank into the chair. He rested his head against the wall and closed his eyes. Not now. Please, God, not now. I just found them. You can't take her from me already. But he knew it didn't work that way. Life didn't ask if you were ready. Didn't wait for you to prepare. It just happened. When it was his turn to enter, Eleanor was lying on the gurney, pale, with wires and tubes connected. But when she saw him, her eyes lit up. My son. Her voice came out weak. I'm sorry for the scare. James pulled up a chair, took her hand. Don't apologize. You did nothing wrong. I ruined your workday. To hell with work. The words came out forceful. Mum, you're more important than any meeting, any contract, any business in this world. Eleanor smiled. You say that now, but there's no but. James squeezed her hand. I spent my whole life chasing the wrong things, thinking success was the answer. That money would fill the hole I had inside. But it didn't fill anything. Nothing filled it. She watched him in silence. Until you appeared, he continued, his voice choked. Until you came into my life and showed me what really matters. And now I found out it's not having. It's being. It's belonging. It's loving and being loved. Oh, son, Eleanor cried. You don't know how good it is to hear that. And I almost lost you today without having said it. James wiped his own face. Almost lost you without you knowing how much I love you. How grateful I am that you never gave up looking for me. I would never give up. Never. I know. James kissed her hand. And now I'm going to take care of you. Properly. Doctors, medicine, everything you need. Cost doesn't matter. Son, you already do so much. I've done nothing yet. He stood, determined. But I will. Starting today, everything changes. 3 days later, Eleanor was discharged. James transformed one of the ground-floor bedrooms into a complete suite for her. She wouldn't need to climb stairs. He hired a private nurse to be on call. He filled the house with medications organized, timed alarms, everything just right. But he did more than that. He made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He sold the company. Not all of it, but most. He kept just enough shares to live comfortably without needing to work 12 hours a day. And with the money from the sale, he did something he never imagined doing. He bought a smaller house, not a mansion, a normal house in a quiet neighborhood, with 3 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, a yard where Eleanor could plant to her heart's content. "You went crazy?" his partner asked when James announced it. "Throwing away everything you built?" "I'm not throwing away," James replied, calm. "I'm choosing what really matters." The move happened over a weekend. When Eleanor and Henry saw the new house, they stood frozen at the gate, speechless. "Is this it?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "It is." James opened the door. "Welcome to our home." The house had natural light coming through big windows. It had a comfortable couch in the living room. Not those expensive but hard design pieces. It had a wooden dining table where plates actually fit, not those ornamental glass tables. And it had soul. "Son," Henry looked around, emotional. "You did this for us?" "I did it for us," James corrected. That mansion wasn't a home. It was a monument to loneliness. This is where we're going to really live." Eleanor walked into the kitchen and started crying. It was smaller than the previous one, but had everything she needed. And on the counter, James had left a note. "This kitchen is yours. Fill it with life." The following months were the best of James's life. He woke without an alarm, had breakfast with his parents, spent the day doing simple things, fixing something with Henry, helping Eleanor in the garden, going to the market together. He still worked, but remotely, a few hours a day, enough to keep his mind active, not enough to dominate his life. And for the first time, he was at peace. One afternoon, he was helping Henry build a planter for the garden when the old man stopped, looked at him and said, "You know, son, I was so afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That when we found you, you'd be a different person. Someone we wouldn't recognize. Someone that money and success had spoiled." Henry hammered a nail. "But you're not. You're good. You're generous. You're human." "I wasn't always," James admitted. "For years I was selfish, focused only on myself. But you reminded me who I should have been all along. We didn't change you, son. We just reminded you of what was always inside you." On a special night, James prepared dinner. Nothing elaborate. Homemade pasta, simple sauce, salad. But he'd made it with his own hands. During dinner, Eleanor commented, "You know what I never stop thanking God for?" "What, Mom?" "That he gave me a little more time." She looked between James and Henry. "There are people who leave without seeing their grown child, without knowing if they're okay. I didn't. I can see you every day. I can make food for you. I can hug you before sleeping. I'm blessed." "I'm the blessed one," James countered. "You could have stayed angry, held hatred, could have blamed me, but you didn't. You only had love." "Anger doesn't bring anyone back," Henry said wisely. "And life's already too short to waste on feelings that only hurt." James looked at them both, old, fragile, with numbered time. But there, present, real. "I wanted to apologize," he said suddenly. "For what?" Eleanor frowned. "For all the years I wasted. For all the times I chose work over life. For almost letting the chance to really know you pass by." James felt emotion rising. "I could have kept going in that empty life. Could have let you leave in that storm. But God gave me a second chance, and I don't want to waste it." Eleanor stood, went around the table, hugged him. "Son, you have nothing to apologize for. You found us. You brought us into your life. You gave us a home. That's everything we ever dreamed of." Henry joined the embrace too, and the three stayed there, intertwined, a tangle of love that had taken over 40 years to form, but was now unbreakable. "I want you to know," James said, "that meeting you changed everything. I'm not the same man I was before that storm. I'm not perfect. I still have a long way to go. But now I know what I'm walking toward." "And what's that?" Eleanor asked. "Toward what really matters. Toward people. Toward love." toward life that's actually lived, not just survived. That night, after they'd gone to bed, James stood at the kitchen window looking at the small backyard. The garden Eleanor had planted was blooming. The bench Henry had fixed sat under the tree. The house that had seemed too small at first now felt exactly right. He thought about the mansion he'd left behind, about the company he'd sold, about the life of success that had left him hollow inside. And he didn't regret a single thing, because now he understood the greatest truth of all. You can have everything money can buy and still have nothing. Or you can have very little and have everything that really matters. And what really mattered was there, in that small house, in two elderly people who loved him more than their own lives, in the second chance he'd been given to choose differently, in the choice to live instead of just exist. James had everything, except peace. One stormy night he stopped for a couple huddled under a tree, an open suitcase, ruined photographs, and a devastating truth. They were his parents. He'd spent 40 years believing he was abandoned. The real lie? It came from those who raised him. James was in the garden, watering the flowers Eleanor had planted when Henry found him. The old man's face was serene in a way that made James's heart skip. "She went in her sleep," Henry said quietly, "just like she wanted. No pain, just peace." The watering can slipped from James's hands. Some months had passed since they'd moved into the small house. Good months. Full months. Eleanor had spent her days in the garden, her hands in the soil, coaxing life from the earth. Henry had fixed every creaky door, every loose board, and James had learned what it meant to truly live. But time, he'd learned, didn't stop for anyone. Eleanor's heart had grown weaker despite the medications. Some mornings, she'd wake breathless. Some afternoons, she'd need to rest after just a few steps, but she never complained. "I'm old," she'd say with that smile. "Old things wear out. That's just how it works." Last night, she'd hugged James extra long before bed. "I love you, son," she'd whispered. "Never forget that. Not for a single day." He should have known. Mothers always know when it's time to say goodbye. The service was small. Just the three of them, James, Henry, and Robert, who'd asked permission to attend. "She forgave me before she went," Robert said afterward, his voice trembling. "Held my hand and said she understood. That fear makes us do terrible things, but love gives us the chance to do better." James nodded, unable to speak. His throat felt like it was full of broken glass. That night, Henry sat on the porch, staring at Eleanor's garden. James brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. They didn't talk for a long time, just watched the fireflies dance between the flowers she'd planted. Finally, Henry spoke. "You know what kills me?" "What?" "We only had a few years together. After 43 years apart, we got maybe 2 years. Feels like we were robbed all over again." James felt tears sliding down his face. "I know. But then I think," Henry's voice cracked, "at least we had those 2 years. At least she died knowing you. Knowing you were good and loved and whole. That's more than a lot of parents get." "She made corn pudding last week," James whispered. "Said she wanted to make sure I remembered the taste, in case..." He couldn't finish. "She was preparing you." Henry wiped his eyes. Mothers do that. They know. The weeks after were the hardest of James's life. He'd wake up and start to call for her before remembering. He'd see something funny and turn to share it, only to find empty space. He'd smell flowers from the garden and feel like his chest was caving in. But Henry was there, solid, present, grieving too, but somehow still standing. "How do you do it?" James asked one morning, finding the old man making breakfast with shaking hands. "How do you keep going?" Henry cracked an egg into the pan. "Because she'd want me to. Because we only get so much time, and wasting it on grief when I could be living would dishonor what she gave me." He looked at James. "She gave me you back, son. That was her last gift. I'm not going to waste it." Months passed. James kept working part-time, kept living in the small house, kept having dinner with Henry every night, the two of them at that wooden table, Eleanor's chair empty, but somehow still present. One evening, Henry said something that changed everything. "I've been thinking about your question. From that night." "What question?" "About how I keep going." Henry set down his fork. "The truth is, son, your mother taught me something in those last months. About what matters." "What?" She said life is just borrowed time. We don't own it. We're just visiting. And the only thing we take with us when we leave is the love we gave and the love we got. Henry's eyes filled. Everything else, money, success, houses, cars, it all stays. But love? Love crosses even death. James felt something shift inside his chest, like a lock turning. She said she could die happy because she'd finally gotten to love you the way she always wanted to. That those 2 years of cooking for you and laughing with you and tucking you in were worth 43 years of searching. I wish I'd had more time with her, James whispered. We all do. But time's not measured in years, son. It's measured in moments, and you gave her enough moments to fill a lifetime. More time passed. James started doing something he'd never done before. He began volunteering at a community center, teaching financial literacy to young people. Not because he wanted recognition, but because Eleanor had told him once. The best legacy isn't money. It's what you teach others. He reconnected with old friends he'd neglected during his years of chasing success, discovered that relationships like gardens needed tending. He visited Robert regularly. The old man was frailer now, eaten by guilt and age. But James sat with him anyway, because Eleanor's forgiveness had taught him something. Holding grudges only poisons the holder. Thank you, Robert said one afternoon, his hand trembling in James's, for not giving up on me, for seeing past my mistakes. You raised me, James replied simply. That counts for something. 2 years after Eleanor's death, James was helping Henry in the garden. The old man still insisted on maintaining her flowers, when Henry paused, leaning on his shovel. I need to tell you something. James looked up from the rose bush he was pruning. What is it? I'm sick. Henry said it plainly, without drama. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. The pruning shears fell from James's hands. No, Dad, no. We'll fight it. The best oncologists, treatments, whatever it takes. Son, Henry held up his hand. I'm 87 years old. I'm tired. I've fought enough. But I just found you. I can't lose you too. You're not losing me. Henry touched James's chest. I'll be right here, just like your mother is. Love doesn't end, remember? It just changes form. Henry was right. 6 months later, he was gone too. But before he left, he gave James one last gift. You asked me once what your mother's last words were, Henry said from his hospice bed, his voice barely a whisper. I lied. It wasn't about love, though that was true too. What was it? She said. Tell him he doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Tell him he's enough, just as he is. James buried his face in his hands and sobbed. And I'm telling you the same thing, son. Henry's hand, paper thin now, touched James's head. You're enough. You always were. The world lied to you, made you think you had to earn your worth. But you don't. You're valuable just by existing. I don't know how to live without you both. Yes, you do. We taught you. Now go teach others. James stood alone in his small house. Henry's chair was empty now, too. The garden was in full bloom. He'd kept it up, just like he'd promised. He thought about the man he'd been before that storm. Wealthy, successful, completely hollow. Driving through the rain, crying over a life that meant nothing. He thought about the moment he'd almost driven past them, almost left 2 elderly people to die in the cold. And he thought about everything that had changed because he'd turned around. The mansion was gone. The company was gone. His parents were gone. But he had something infinitely more valuable. He had meaning. He understood now what Eleanor meant. Life wasn't about accumulation. It was about connection. It wasn't about success. It was about significance. It wasn't about having everything. It was about loving someone more than you loved yourself. He walked to the window, looking at the garden where Eleanor's flowers still bloomed, where Henry's bench still sat under the tree. I get it now, he whispered to them, wherever they were. I finally get it. Life had given him 43 years of lies and 2 years of truth. And those 2 years of truth were worth more than all 43 years of lies combined. Because in the end, when everything else fell away, when money and success and houses and status all crumbled to dust, only one thing remained. Love. The love you gave and the love you received. That was the only currency that mattered. That was the only treasure you could take with you. And James had learned this lesson just in time. Not to build a fortune. not to leave a legacy of wealth, but to live each day choosing people over profits, presence over prestige, connection over conquest. His parents had spent 43 years searching for him, and in finding them, he'd found himself. Not the self he'd built from lies and fear, but the self he was always meant to be. The self who understood that time was a gift, not a guarantee. That love was the answer, not success. That being enough was better than having everything. And as he stood there in his small house, surrounded by memories of two people who'd loved him more than their own lives, James Mitchell finally understood what it meant to be rich. It had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with love.